Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make chocolate scones. Hey Sugar Spun bakers, it's Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. Today we are making chocolate scones. They are super flaky, buttery, they absolutely melt in your mouth, and they have a decadent chocolate glaze. I think you are going to love these, so let's go ahead and get started by preheating our oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Now to make the best, most tender scones, I highly recommend using a food processor, so that's what I'm going to be using today. I will include instructions in the recipe in the written description on how to make this without a food processor if you don't have one. Now in the basin of our food processor, we're going to combine 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup granulated sugar, 1/4 cup of natural unsweetened cocoa powder, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of table salt. Now we're just going to put the lid on our food processor and just briefly pulse everything until it's completely combined. All right, now the next thing you're going to need for today's recipe is 1 cup of cold, very cold, unsalted butter. I like to pop my butter in the freezer for about 15 to 20 minutes before I begin this recipe, just so I can ensure it's nice and cold. Cold butter is one of the key ingredients to making sure our scones stay nice and flaky and that they're nice and tender. Now I'm just gonna cut this butter into 8 pieces. And then I'm just going to scatter those over the surface of my flour and cocoa powder and the rest of my ingredients. Now we'll pulse everything together again until that butter is nicely incorporated into the flour and cocoa powder. Now what I like to see at this point, and I'll show you how the batter or dough, whatever you want to call it at this point, should look with my spoon. You can see there's still some discernible chunks of butter remaining. They may be about chocolate chip sized. That's great. The butter doesn't have to be completely incorporated. You don't want any super huge pieces, but you do want to still see some discernible pieces of butter. Now I'm going to grab a 1/2 cup of heavy cream. And again, I want this to be very cold as well. And I'm just going to drizzle it over the other ingredients. We'll also be adding 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And now we're going to pulse everything together until the batter begins to cling to itself and clump together. I like to do this in 1-second pulses. All right, let me take a look here. So the dough is beginning to cling together at this point, but it's still pretty crumbly and could be a little bit difficult to work with. So I'm going to go just a little bit further. All right, so now you can see how this looks. This is the consistency I like my dough to be before I go any further. I like to add chocolate chips to this recipe, but I don't like to pulverize them in the food processor. So what I'm going to do is I've taken the basin off of the stand and I'm just gonna remove the blade and I'm going to add my chocolate chips. I like to use about a 1/2 cup or so of chocolate chips. This is a blend of 1/4 cup mini chocolate chips and 1/4 cup regular size semi-sweet chips. And I'll just add them into the basin of the food processor now that the blade's out and just kind of stir them together. It's okay if they're not totally incorporated at this point because we'll get them worked together in the next step. Now the next step is we're going to kind of laminate this dough by folding it over itself repeatedly, which helps encourage those tender flaky layers. So I'm just going to dust this surface with a little bit of flour. It's a clean surface, a little bit of flour, and I'm going to take my dough onto the surface and just use my hands to work it together. Now you don't want to overhandle the dough, you don't want to end up melting that butter, making your ingredients too warm, or what that'll do is your scones won't be quite as flaky, you're not going to have quite the right texture. So handle it as little as possible and work as quickly as you can. There is some handling required though, so now that I've worked all the dough together, I'm going to fold it over itself, kind of flatten it a little bit. I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and I'm going to repeat this step. We're going to do this a total of 5 times. And as you can see, the chocolate chips are getting a little bit more evenly distributed as we go through these steps. All right, now that I've done 5 turns and fold overs, I'm going to form this dough into a disc. And I want this disc to be pretty nice and even on top, about 1 inch tall and about 6 inches wide. Now we'll grab a large knife and we're going to cut this into 8 wedges. Now, when you are cutting your scones, it is so important that you press straight down with a knife. So don't saw with a knife. If you do that, your scones are probably going to topple over in the oven. Just make sure you're pressing straight down with every cut. So a big knife is great for this. All right, I have my 8 wedges here now, so I'm going to transfer these to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And I do space them apart a little bit. I want to give them at least 2 inches of space. It's 2 inches of space between scones. Now you could take these right over to the oven, but one thing I like to do is pop them in the freezer for about 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, I'll take them over to the center rack of my 375-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven, where they're going to need to bake for about 14 to 16 minutes. Now, once they're finished baking and while they're cooling, I like to prepare a chocolate drizzle. This is super simple, but it really sets the scones over the top, and it's great if you love a decadent snack. Now for this, we're going to be mixing together 3/4 cup of powdered sugar, 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder, and again, I'm using natural unsweetened cocoa powder here. And I'm going to whisk these together. And then I have 3 tablespoons of milk measured out here. I'm just going to add about 2 tablespoons for now. I'll add more if I need to. And I'm going to whisk everything together. And I'm also going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now what I want is a glaze that when I lift the whisk out of the bowl, the glaze that drizzles off kind of holds its shape for a couple seconds before it dissolves into the bowl. It actually looks like I used too much milk right off the bat here, so I'm going to add a little bit more powdered sugar. The nice thing about this glaze is it's impossible to mess up. So this looks a little bit better, might be a little thinner than I typically do it, but I'm pretty happy with this. So my scones have had a little bit of time to cool, so now I'm going to drizzle this right over the scones. And this does make enough glaze that if you want to dip your scones in the glaze instead of drizzle them with it, you can go ahead and do that. You do want to make sure your scones are really cool before you do this though, because if they're still warm, they could fall apart while you're dipping them. Now, of course, you can dig in right away if you don't mind getting a little bit messy, or you can let the glaze harden completely and then you can enjoy your scones. And that is how you make these amazing, buttery, delicious chocolate scones. I hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe, and if you try this one out, please leave me a comment. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. These are amazing.